Dear students, I welcome you to yet another lecture on corporate law. The topic of discussion for today's lecture is share capital. In today's lecture, we are going to understand the meaning of the term share capital. We are also going to understand the kinds of share capital. We are also going to understand the alteration of share capital. Dear students, the joint stock company is a big form of business organization. The amount required by the company for its business activities is raised by the issue of shares. The amount so raised is called share capital or capital of the company. It may be also remembered that a company limited by shares will have share capital. A company limited by guarantee or an unlimited company may not have any share capital. The persons who buy the shares of the company are called shareholders. Share capital is not a necessary condition of incorporation. In case share capital is thought necessary, the memorandum must state the amount of capital with which the company is desired to be registered and the number of shares into which it is to be divided. Authoritative sources on company law such as Buckley on the Companies Act and Palmer's Company Law lend support to the proposition that the words capital and share capital are synonymous. For a company to have share capital, it is necessary that its memorandum should state the amount and its division. Dear students, we shall now discuss the types of share capital. The first category is authorized share capital or registered or nominal share capital. This is the amount of capital with which the company intends to get itself registered. This is the amount of share capital which a company is authorized to issue. Nominal share capital is divided into shares of a fixed amount. It must be set out in the Memorandum of Association. It can be increased or decreased by following the prescribed procedure. The second category is issued share capital. It is that part of the nominal capital which is actually issued by the company for public subscription. A company need not issue the entire authorized capital at once. It goes on raising the capital as and when the need for additional funds is felt. The difference between the nominal and the issued capital is known as unissued capital, which can be issued to the public at a later date. Where the whole of the authorized capital is offered to the public, the authorized and the issued share capital will be the same. Dear students, it's also important to remember that issued capital cannot be more than the authorized capital. Issued capital includes the shares allotted to the public, vendors, signatories to the Memorandum of Association, etc. The next category is unissued share capital. The part of the authorized capital not offered for subscription to the public is known as unissued capital. Such capital can be offered to the public on a later date. Now, dear students, we discuss what is meant by subscribed capital. It is that part of the nominal capital which has actually been taken up by shareholders who have agreed to give consideration in kind or in cash for the shares that are issued to them. Where shares issued for subscription are wholly subscribed for, issued share capital would mean the same thing as subscribed share capital. That part of the issued share capital which is not subscribed by the public is called unsubscribed capital. Subscribed capital cannot be more than the issued capital. Let us now try to understand this with the help of an example. A company was incorporated with a capital of 9 lakh rupees. This was divided into 90,000 equity shares of rupees 10 each. It issued 70,000 shares to the public. In the first case, 50,000 shares were taken by the public. In the second case, 70,000 shares were taken by the public. Now, the question is, what will be the amount of different capitals? Since the company is incorporated, that is registered with a capital of rupees 9 lakh, which has been divided into 90,000 shares of rupees 10 each, therefore, the authorized share capital of the company would be 9 lakh rupees, that is 90,000 shares of rupees 10 each. What would be the unsubscribed capital? In the first case, where 50,000 shares are taken by the public, Unsubscribed share capital will be the difference between the shares issued to the public and the shares subscribed by the public. This difference is 2 lakh rupees, that is 7 lakh minus 5 lakh rupees. That would be the 2 lakh rupees would be the authorized capital of the company. In the second situation, the public has subscribed for 70,000 shares of rupees 10 each. Therefore, the subscribed share capital is 7 lakh rupees. Since the subscribed share capital is equivalent to the issued share capital, there will be no unsubscribed share capital in this case. Dear students, we shall now try and understand what is meant by called up share capital. The amount due on the shares subscribed may be collected from the shareholders in installments at different intervals. Called up share capital is that amount of the nominal value of shares subscribed for which the company has asked its shareholders to pay by means of calls or otherwise. For example, if 10,000 shares of rupees 100 each have been subscribed by the public and the company has asked the shareholders to pay rupees 10 on application, rupees 20 on allotment and rupees 30 on the first call, then the called up share capital of the company would be 6 lakh rupees. That is 10,000 into rupees 60. The remaining amount, that is rupees 40 per share on 10,000 shares, which would be 4 lakh rupees, would be the uncalled capital of the company. Now, dear students, we shall understand what is meant by the term paid up capital. That part of the called up capital which is actually paid by the members is known as the paid up share capital. In other words, paid up share capital represents the total payments made by the shareholders to the company in response to the calls made by the company. Paid up capital of the company is calculated by deducting the calls in arrears from the called up capital. In the example that we just discussed, out of the 10,000 shares of rupees 100 each, on which rupees 60 has been called by the company from the shareholders, one shareholder holding 100 shares fails to pay the first call of rupees 30 per share on his shares. The paid up share capital of the company would be rupees 6 lakh minus rupees 3,000, which would be rupees 5 lakhs and 97,000. Dear students, we now discuss what is meant by reserve capital. Reserve capital is that part of the uncalled capital which has been reserved by the company by passing a special resolution to be called only in the event of its liquidation. This capital cannot be called up during the existence of the company. It would be only available in the event of the liquidation as an additional security to the creditors of the company. Dear students, we now understand the types of shares. The categories into which shares are divided are equity shares and preference shares. Equity share capital can be issued with voting rights or with differential rights as to the dividend, voting or otherwise in accordance with such rules and subject to such conditions as may be prescribed. Dear students, we now understand preference share capital. Section 43 of the Companies Act 2013 defines preference share capital. According to this section, preference share capital is that share capital which fulfills the twin requirements of number 1, that as respect dividends, it carries or will carry a preferential right to be paid a fixed amount calculated at a fixed rate, and that part as respects capital, it carries on the winding up of the company a preferential right to be repaid the amount of capital paid upon such shares. In other words, on the winding up of the company, the amount paid up on the preference shares must be required to be paid back before anything is paid to the ordinary shareholders. Thus, a preference share carries number 1, a right to be paid fixed amount of dividends or the amount of dividends calculated at a fixed rate, and number 2, also a right to be paid the amount of capital paid upon such shares in the winding up of the company. Dear students, now we shall understand the fact that preference shares are further subdivided into cumulative preference shares and non-cumulative preference shares. In case the company has not been able to pay part or all of the annual dividends, because of insufficient profit, the unpaid amount is carried forward to the future years and made good when the company has sufficient profit to pay the dividends. These type of shares are called cumulative preference shares. Non-cumulative preference shares are those types of preference shares which have a right to get a fixed rate of dividend out of the profits of the current year only. They do not carry the right to receive arrears of dividend. Dear students, preference shares are further divided into two categories. One is participating preference shares and the other is non-participating preference shares. Those preference shares which have a right to participate in any surplus profit of the company after paying the equity shareholders in addition to the fixed rate of their dividend are called participating preference shares. Those preference shares which do not carry the right of share in excess profits are known as non-participating preference shares. Another category of preference shares is convertible preference shares and non-convertible preference shares. Those preference shares which can be converted into equity shares at the option of the holders after a fixed period according to the terms and conditions of their issue are known as convertible preference shares. Preference shares which are not convertible into equity shares are known as non-convertible preference shares. Another category would be redeemable preference shares and irredeemable preference shares. Redeemable preference shares are those preference shares that the company will buy back at an agreed date in the future. Irredeemable preference shares are those that will not be bought back by the company. Shareholders will continue to earn dividends as long as the profit is earned. Dear students, we shall understand the tenure of preference shares. The amendment of 1988 has abolished the category of irredeemable preference shares. Section 55, Clause 1 of the Companies Act states that no company limited by shares shall issue any preference share which is irredeemable after 20 years. Companies have been permitted to issue preference shares for a period exceeding 20 years only for infrastructural projects. Dear students, we shall now try to understand the procedure for issue of shares. The first step is issue of prospectus. Whenever shares are to be issued to the public, the company must issue a prospectus. Prospectus means an open invitation to the public to take up the shares of the company. Thus, a private company need not issue a prospectus. Even a public company issuing its shares privately need not issue a prospectus. However, it is required to file a statement in lieu of prospectus with the Registrar of Companies. The prospectus contains relevant information like names of the directors, terms of the issue, etc. It also states the opening date of the subscription list, the amount payable on application, on allotment and the earliest closing date of the subscription list. The second step would be application of shares. A person intending to subscribe to the share capital of the company has to submit an application for shares in the prescribed form to the company along with the application money before the last date of the subscription mentioned in the prospectus. Oversubscription. If the number of shares applied for is more than the number of shares offered to the public, then that is known as oversubscription. Undersubscription. If the number of shares applied for is less than the number of shares offered to the public, then it is called as undersubscription. The third step in this process is allotment of shares. After the last date of the receipt of applications is over, the directors proceed with the allotment work. However, a company cannot allot the shares unless the minimum subscription amount mentioned in the prospectus is collected within the stipulated period of time. The directors pass a resolution in the board meeting for allotment of shares indicating clearly the class and the number of shares allotted with distinctive numbers. Then letters of allotment are sent to the concerned applicants. Letters of regret are sent to those who are not allotted any shares and the application money is refunded to them. Partial allotment. In partial allotment, the company rejects some applications totally, refunds their application money and allots the shares to the remaining applicants. Pro rata allotment. When a company makes a pro rata allotment, it allots the shares to all the applicants but allots lesser shares than applied for. For example, if a person has applied for 300 shares, he may get only 200 shares. The fourth step is call on shares. The remaining amount of share capital may be collected in installments as laid down in the prospectus. Such installments are called as call on shares. They may be termed as allotment amount, first call, second call, etc. Call in arrears. Some shareholders may not pay the money due from them. The outstanding amounts are transferred to an account called as call in arrears account. The balance of calls in area account is deducted from the called up capital in the balance sheet. Calls in advance. A company may, if so authorized by its articles, accept from a shareholder either the whole or part of the amount remaining unpaid on any share held by them as calls in advance. No dividend is paid on such calls in advance. However, interest has to be paid on such calls in advance. The terms of issue of shares. A limited company may issue the shares on different terms. For example, number 1, issue of shares for consideration other than cash or for cash or on capitalization of reserves. Number 2, issue of shares at par, that is at face value or at a nominal value. Number 3, issue of shares at a premium, that is at more than face value. Number 4, issue of shares at a discount, that is at less than the face value. Dear students, we shall now discuss the issue of shares at a premium. When the shares are issued at a price higher than the nominal value of the shares, then it is called as shares issued at a premium. The amount of premium is decided by the board of directors as per the guidelines issued by the SEBI. Such share premium collected by the company is credited to a separate account called as Securities Premium Reserve Account. Although the securities premium is a profit to the company, it is not a revenue profit. It is to be treated as capital profit, which can be utilized only for the purposes mentioned in Section 52 of the Companies Act. These are number 1, issue of fully paid bonus shares to the existing shareholders. Number 2, writing off the preliminary expenses of the company. Number 3, writing off the expenses of the issue or the commission paid or discount allowed on any issue of shares or debentures. Number 4, providing the premium payable on redemption of preference shares or debentures. Number 5, for the purchase of its own shares or securities under Section 68. Dear students, we now try and understand the issue of shares at a discount. Under the Companies Act 1956, issue of shares at a discount was permitted subject to certain conditions. However, Section 53 of the Companies Act 2013 provides that no company can issue shares at a discount. Under the Companies Act 2013, only sweat equity shares can be issued at a discount. What are sweat equity shares? Issue of sweat equity shares is governed by the provisions of Section 53 of the Companies Act 2013. Sweat equity shares means those equity shares which are issued by the company to its employees or directors at a discount or for consideration other than cash for providing know-how or making available rights in the nature of intellectual property rights or value additions by whatever name it is called. It is therefore necessary for the issue of sweat equity shares that the concerned employee either provides the know-how, the intellectual property rights or other value additions to the company. Forfeiture of shares. Sometimes some shareholders fail to pay the called up amount in full. That is, they do not pay in one or more installments after the allotment of the shares to them. In such a case, either the company can go to the court and file a suit against the defaulting shareholders for recovery of the due amount, or can cancel the membership of the defaulting shareholders. In case the membership is cancelled, the amount paid by the defaulting members towards the share capital stands forfeited. This is called forfeiture of shares. Reissue of forfeited share. If the shares are forfeited, the membership of the shareholder stands cancelled and the shares become the property of the company. Thereafter, the company has an option of selling such forfeited shares. The sale of forfeited shares is called as reissue of shares. Surrender of shares. A shareholder who is not able to pay the called money may surrender his or her shares to the company. The company cancels such surrendered shares. Surrender is a voluntary act on the part of the shareholder, whereas forfeiture is a compulsory act on the part of the company. The effect of both the surrender and forfeiture is the same, that is, cancellation of the shares. The company can accept surrender of shares if permitted by the Articles of Association. The accounting treatment in respect of surrender of shares is the same as that of forfeiture of shares. Dear students, we shall now try to understand alteration of share capital provided in Section 61 of the Companies Act 2013. A limited company with a share capital can alter the capital clause of its Memorandum of Association in the ways which we shall soon discuss, provided authority to alter is given by the articles. Number 1. It may increase its capital by issuing new shares. Number 2. It can consolidate the whole or any part of its share capital into shares of larger amount. Number 3. It can convert shares into stock or vice versa. Number 4. Subdivide the whole or any part of its share capital into shares of smaller amount. Number 5. Cancel those shares which have not been taken up and reduce its capital accordingly. Any of the things that we just discussed can be done by the company by passing a resolution at its general meeting, but this does not require to be confirmed by the National Company Law Tribunal. Within 30 days of alteration, notice must be given to the registrar, who will record the same and make necessary alteration to the company's memorandum and articles. Notice to the registrar has similarly to be given when redeemable preference shares have to be redeemed. Similar information is also required to be sent where the capital has been increased beyond the authorized limit, or where a company, being not a company limited by shares, has increased the number of its members. Dear students, we shall now try to understand further issue of share capital as provided under Section 62 of the Companies Act 2013. A company, including a private company, having a share capital can increase its subscribed share capital by issue of further shares to persons who are holders of equity shares of the company in proportion to the paid up share capital on those shares by sending a letter of offer. This is known as shareholders' preemptive right or rights issue. The conditions which must be fulfilled when an offer of shares is made to existing shareholders are: we have to remember number 1, shareholders' preemptive right or rights issue. The first condition is the offer shall be made by the notice specifying the number of shares offered and limiting a time not being less than 15 days and not exceeding 30 days from the date of the offer within which the offer, if not accepted, shall be deemed to have been declined. Number 2. The notice shall be dispatched through registered post or speed post or through the electronic mode to all the existing shareholders at least 3 days before the opening of the issue. The next condition is that the offer shall be deemed to include a right exercisable by the person concerned to renounce the shares offered to him or any of them in favour of any other person, and the letter of offer shall contain a statement of this right. After the expiry of the term specified in the letter of offer or on receipt of earlier intimation from the person to whom such notice is given that he declines to accept the shares offered, the Board of Directors may dispose of them in such a manner which is not disadvantageous to the shareholders and to the company. It is important to remember that these conditions shall not apply to the increase of the share capital of a company caused by the exercise of an option as a term attached to the debentures issued or loan raised by the company to convert such debentures or loans into shares in the company. The terms of issue of such debentures or loan containing such an option should have been approved before the issue of such debentures or the raising of loan by a special resolution passed by the company in its general meeting, except when the loan is from the central government or by any institution specified by it. Dear students, we shall now discuss the shareholders' preemptive right, the judicial control. The inherent right of the existing shareholders to the new shares of the company has extensive judicial backing in India and other jurisdictions as well. In India, the Companies Act has always found mention regarding the preemptive right of the existing shareholders to the new shares of the company. Section 81, Clause 1 of the Companies Act 1956 had explicit mention relating to the preemptive right of the existing shareholders. The Supreme Court, while dealing with this provision in the landmark case of Nandlal Zaveri versus Bombay Life Assurance Company Limited, laid down that the company must give the first option to the existing shareholders before favouring anyone else. The Companies Act 2013 also explicitly provides for a preemptive right of the shareholders to the new shares of the company. The Supreme Court also, in the landmark case of Sahara India Real Estate Corporation versus SEBI, held that the Companies Act postulates a preemptive right on the part of the existing shareholders to the issue of new shares. Thus, it is evident that a company which engages in further issue of shares should offer it to the existing shareholders before offering it to anyone else. This is a recognized principle in India and other jurisdictions as well. Before offering shares to the existing shareholders, a company having share capital may issue further shares to employees under a scheme of employee stock option subject to a special resolution passed by the company and subject to such conditions as may be prescribed under Rule 12 of the company's Share Capital and Debenture Rules 2014. Now, what is the issue of employee stock options? According to Section 2, Clause 37 of the Companies Act 2013, employee stock option means the option given to the directors, officers or employees of a company or of its holding company or subsidiary company or companies, if any, which gives such directors, officers or employees the benefit or right to purchase or to subscribe for the shares of the company at a future date at a predetermined price. Dear students, we shall now try to understand reduction of share capital. A reduction of capital is unlawful except when sanctioned by the National Company Law Tribunal. Conservation of capital is one of the main principles of the company law. The share capital of a company is the only security on which the creditors rely. Any reduction of capital, therefore, diminishes the fund out of which they are to be paid. It is for this reason that companies limited by shares are not allowed to purchase their own shares because the capital is thereby reduced. For the same reason, the power to forfeit and the power to accept a surrender of shares are strictly guarded. But sometimes there may be a genuine necessity for the reduction of share capital. Closely fenced power is therefore given by Section 66 of the Companies Act 2013. Under this section, a company limited by shares or a guarantee company having a share capital may reduce its capital in any way. For example, number 1, it may extinguish or reduce the liability on any of its shares. Number 2, it can cancel any paid up share capital which is lost or is unrepresented by any available assets. Number 3, pay off any paid up share capital which is in excess of the wants of the company. Complete details of the procedure to be followed for effecting a reduction are given in the Companies Act itself. Authority to reduce capital must be present in the articles. In pursuance of that authority, a special resolution must be passed which should authorize the contemplated reduction of the capital. The next stage is to apply by petition to the tribunal for an order confirming the reduction. Dear students, this is all with regard to today's lecture. In today's lecture, we try to understand what is meant by the term share capital. We also try to understand the various types of share capital. We also try to understand how the share capital can be altered, that is, further issue of share capital as well as reduction of share capital. Hope you have been able to understand fully. Stay blessed.